So today we're going to be talking about neurophysiology. Our last video we talked a little bit about some neuroanatomy and kind of the structural components of our nervous system. And so today we're going to get more into the processes going on at kind of like a cellular level. All right. So the most basic component of our nervous system is a nerve cell. And so on this end of the nerve cell, we're going to have what's called the dendrite, which is like the incoming portion of the cell. So other nerve cells or sensory organs or whatever it may be will communicate with the nerve cell at this point. And what happens is you have an incoming signal coming in over here, and with enough stimulation, that will basically trigger a response in the nerve cell and create a positive gradient down the nerve cell. And so this gradient, once it reaches this portion at the end of the other end of the nerve cell, it's called the axon hillock right here. It needs to build up a high enough gradient in order for it to stimulate the nerve conduction. So with enough stimulation, you create a high enough positive gradient that will stimulate the nerve to propagate the signal down its axon, which is its long communicating portion right here. Okay, and so this portion right here is really important because it allows the nerve cell to fire with appropriate stimulation. So not everything makes it fire, but enough stimulation will. And so when that happens, it opens up ion channels along the axon right here, allows sodium into the cell, and creates a further positive gradient as it moves down the nerve cell, as so, right? And that will continue to propagate as long as the threshold right here, so if it's still being stimulated, as long as this threshold is high enough, that will continue to propagate the signal, and once it's not, then the propagation stops, okay? And so this is going to travel down the axon as a positive gradient, basically an electrochemical signal relaying information. And so as it moves down, it's going to reach its end target, wherever that may be. And so what happens here is these channels are spaced a certain amount apart, and so there's also a sheath around these called myelin, and that helps to speed up the propagation of the signal. And so what the sheath does is it basically insulates this tube or this cord, whatever you want to call it, and creates more spacing between the channels so that the signal can basically jump further in a quicker amount of time. And so the myelin helps insulate and speed up the conduction process, right? And so as that signal travels down the nerve cell, you're gonna reach a destination. So in our scenario here, we have it as a muscle, right? And so it could be anything. It could be another nerve cell. It could be up to the brain, to the spinal cord, wherever it may be. Just this scenario, we chose a muscle cell, right? And so we're really concerned more now with like the muscular portion of this, and so we're going to talk about motor units. We touched on motor units in one of our other videos, but here we're going to kind of retouch on them and how it's integrated in with our nervous system, right? So as that nerve conducts the signal down, one of these nerves happens to be connected to a muscle, right? And so this nerve that connects to the muscle, it's gonna innervate a certain amount of muscle cells in that muscle, and that's called the motor unit. So the nerve plus all of the cells, the muscle fibers that it innervates, is one motor unit. And so we have big and small motor units, and the difference is with big motor units, it's basically one nerve cell connected to a ton of muscle fibers. And that's going to create a more global contraction, right? Because one signal tells all those signals to contract. That's for bigger, larger, gross movements. But then if you have a smaller ratio of cells to nerve fibers, then that's going to be more fine movements, right? So if you have a nerve running to one or two muscle fibers, that's controlling those muscle fibers by themselves. And so it creates a less global effect, which allows for more specific contraction or movements that you're trying to create, okay? So that's basically the whole concept of the motor unit, is telling you how much is contracting with each nerve impulse, all right? So now as we kind of get over here and we're talking more so about a lot of the nervous system response at the muscular level, we need to talk about some of the reflexes that are built into the muscle itself. And so one of the more important ones is the muscle spindle. And so what the muscle spindle is it's this little capsule of muscle fibers here that are monitoring the amount of stretch taking place in the muscle, right? And so as it's monitoring the stretch of the muscle, it's basically doing so as a protection, as a mechanism of protection, right? And so we have a lot of extrafusal muscle fibers, so non-capsular ones that are just normal fibers that are used for contracting the muscle and then we have the ones that are inside of the capsule, and those are for monitoring the amount of stretch in the muscle. And so if those get stretched too much, they send a signal because there's a nerve actually hooked up to this that goes out back towards the spinal cord, and if there's too much stretch, this signal is sent to the spinal cord, and without even going back up to the brain, just as a reflex at that spinal cord level, another signal is sent back out on an alpha motor neuron back to the muscle to contract all these other fibers, right? That's called the myotatic or stretch reflex. And so that's important because like I said, it's a protection mechanism where if there's too much stretch going on in the muscle, your body has a reflex to contract that muscle and protect itself from being stretched too far. Now, on the other hand, we have what's called the Golgi tendon organ up in the tendons of the muscles, and what these are basically little collagen fibers. So the tendons of the muscle are made out of collagen, and there's nerves wrapped around some special collagen fibers that monitor almost the opposite effect, right? And so if a muscle is contracting too hard, then this will generate a lot of tension on the tendons, which as a protection mechanism sends out a signal back to the spinal cord, and same thing, without going up to the brain, at the level of the spinal cord, this signal is going to inhibit alpha motor neuron function, the neuron running to the muscle, and it causes the muscle to relax because there's no more stimulation of these muscle fibers, right? So two opposite kind of reflexes, but both very useful, right? So the spindle is monitoring the amount of stretch and causes a contraction when stimulated, and the GTO, the Golgi tendon organ, is monitoring the amount of tension in the tendon from contraction and then causing the muscle to relax when stimulated enough, right? So these are just a couple examples of how our nervous system is working more at a physiological level. And so what we need to do is integrate a lot of our knowledge about how we can use clinical rehab or training based on these nervous system principles and how they interact through muscle, either voluntarily or through reflexes, okay? So again, very, very scratch the surface kind of deal here, where these are a lot more complex topics than we talked about, but we just want to get into it a little bit and give you a basis for what we're going to be talking about moving forward. So this was the last of our Physiology 101 videos, and really what we wanted to do with these was just, like I said, create a basis for a lot of the talking points that we'll be going over moving forward, and keeping it simple so a lot of people can follow along. And now moving forward, we're going to start developing a couple more series that are getting more deep into some of these topics, as far as we'll talk more about neurology, whether it's physiology or anatomy. We're going to do some programming videos. We're going to do some nutrition videos, but we just wanted to create a basis for a lot of the things that we're going to be talking about moving forward. So we're really excited to keep going with a lot of this stuff. If you guys like our videos, keep going and like the videos, and